My father is an old man. He has no work to do these days. So the old man often narrates me stories of when he was a child. He narrates me stories of his father, my grandfather. This is back then in the days when Europe and the world was at peace, and before that fatal turn at Sarajevo was yet to be taken. This was back in that time. My grandfather, my father says, used to narrate to him of what could happen in the future, his thoughts upon it. The world, my grandfather said, had finally civilized. New industry and civilization meant that there could not be a possibility of war, for the war which would happen would simply end all wars, and thus such a war was impossible, my grandfather used to say. He said that the empires of Europe shall remain stable for centuries to come. At the same time, internally, there would be reforms from above. There would be self-determination, my grandfather thought. In 50 years' time from back then, there would be true independence and world peace. As the colonial empires would wither away and Asia and Africa would catch up with the West, the world should live as one united whole. Those were the utopian dreams of my grandfather that he vividly narrated to my father. Alas, what a world it was. I'm happy that my grandfather isn't alive to see what has become of our globe today. The events of the years between are well known to all, but even then, even after all the Nazi oppression, global war, and nuclear fire, there was still hope that there would be peace after its end. But alas, even there we faced disappointment. When the word Kalter Krieg was first uttered in the 1950s, nobody had really thought that it would govern every facet of a man's life, right from the policy governing a peasant working in the fields of Wyoming, to the policies governing the fates of entire nations. Everything has been governed by one single goal: the greed. The greed of spreading your ideology, the greed of power, the greed of destiny. As the United States of America, Germany, and Japan battle for influence. And yet, for all its triumphs and victories, the German Reich has not really managed to catch the world's attention in ways that it used to. Its sphere of influence confined to Europe, its supporters all across the world dead or irrelevant, the German Reich is now but one continuous empire. It is true that Albert Speer has brought a degree of discipline and order to Germany. By fighting against his own reformist friends and the conservative National Socialists, Albert Speer has reformed the system of National Socialism into a coherent ideology capable of facing economic shocks and civil disobediences. Some say that Albert Speer has made the lives of Eastern Europeans and Slavs better. But do you know what I think? I think that by converting the Reichskommissariats into Reichslands, Albert Speer has actually extended the life of the Nazi Empire by not 10, not 100, but possibly hundreds of years more. For if you take everything away from a man, he fights to death like a cornered tiger. But give a man the carrot, and he shall take it. And then it shall be every man for himself. That is what Albert Speer has achieved in Eastern Europe. A stable Nazi empire, There was once a cruel man sitting in his castle in Ost-Paris, Heinrich Himmler. But the days of Heinrich Himmler are over. After the catastrophic fall of Burgundy, German forces invaded Burgundy and established Pact Commission Frank-Reich under Adolf Hitler. The rest of the German sphere of influence consists mainly of countries which are either its puppets or some countries like Finland which are simply part of the German sphere. In Duitsland we have Cornelius van Gielkerken, the leader of Duitsland, or what used to be Netherlands. Unlike the Nazis, Gielkerken is a follower of Mussolini's original brand of fascism, combining rabid nationalism with corporatism. In Denmark, Werner Best's oligarchy continues. In Norway, we have Gulbrand Lund. Gulbrand Lund is a complicated man. On one hand, he is a loyal Nazi collaborator governing Norway like his own feudal realm. But on the other hand, Gulbrand's ideology is somewhat uncomfortable to the Nazis, for he separates the Nordic peoples from the German peoples. He believes that the Nords, the Scandinavians, are a better breed of Aryans than the decadent Germans. And who knows who is right and who is not. Sweden continues as an island of democracy and non-alignment in the middle of the Nazi Empire. In Finland, Elias Simoki is a fascist, and a loyal one at that. Simoki has come to power after the second crisis of democracy. His regime is propped up by the Germans, and it was the Germans who weakened the democratic structure of Finland to let Simoki come to power. In Slovakia and in Hungary, Jan Golan and Bela Imredi rule again as loyal Nazi followers, although they themselves are not Nazi. Bela Imredi is a virulent anti-Semite, but economically and ideologically he is a corporatist. And that is it for the Nazi Empire. For all that they did, this is all the Nazis could achieve. For liberty, after all, is a far stronger force than any National Socialist oppression can inflict upon the world. The United States of America and its empire is the clear winner of the so-called Kalter Krieg. Thanks to the works of President Hart and his successor Chep Morrison, the liberal world order has been confirmed. But it wasn't always like that. Before Philip Hart's election victory in 1968, the United States of America went through two difficult regimes. First was Richard Nixon, who betrayed the cause of democracy. And then there was Wallace, the Dixiecrat, the man who betrayed the ideals of liberty itself. But these two are now history. For Richard Nixon and George Wallace are now mere retired ex-presidents. Philip Hart's new order in America, the fate of liberalism has been confirmed. Now we will take a look at what has happened to the rest of Europe. It is true that America has secured massive victories in the Kalter Krieg. Africa has been liberated. Even in Southeast Asia, Indonesia has been liberated, Philippines has been liberated from Japanese oppression. But the Empire of Japan is not a sitting duck. For these days it is even powerful than the German Reich. Alas, the Daily conspiracy broke what little remained of democracy in Japan. For General Muto Akira launched a bloody coup. Muto Akira is a very bloody man by nature. In World War II, he had a system of cruelty that was cruel even by the standards of the Imperial Japanese Army. But unlike his other comrades, Muto Akira does not want to bring about military rule for empowering the emperor. No. He wishes to maintain the emperor's power as it was before. Rather, he wishes to increase his own power, the power of his revolutionary council of the Imperial Japanese Army. In a sense, Muto Akira is a New Age shogun. A New Age shogun in the world of Führers and liberators. But let us come back to Europe for a bit. In Britain, the HMMLR liberationists won the civil war against the royalists. King Edward was forced to abdicate and Queen Elizabeth returned from Canada. After the liberation was over, however, the British public turned back to conservatism. It is said that George Jellicoe's victory was because of two factors. The first factor was that his opponents, the Labour parties, they advocated for the removal of the monarchy. And so, supporters of Jellicoe inside the liberation movements voted for him. The second was the portion of the British public which supported the fascist government. They would rather have a conservative in power than a Labour man. And in their own words, they're right. The biggest tragedy for democracy in Europe is France. Antoine Pinay came to power on the promises of democracy and liberalization. He declared in the 1960s that there would be democracy in the next decade, but it is 1977 now. And Pinay has not brought democracy yet, for he is bowed down to the pressures of Germania. Despite being a part of the Organization of Free Nations, Pinay knows that moving too forward, too fast towards the other path will anger his neighbor, let's just say. And Switzerland remains the isolated mountain republic under Rudolf Kang. It is agrarian. The Swiss have nothing to fear. They have enough force to defeat two Germanys, and they have enough banks to store the money of two Germanys. And Germany cannot afford to let the Swiss be angered, lest they destroy their assets. Now we come to the black spot of Europe, friends, the National Redemption Front. Sometimes in history we are taught about the Spanish Inquisition, and we might laugh about it. Hey, this is ridiculous. How can people burn people of other religions on crosses? I mean, this is idiotic, and even the Nazis don't persecute religious minorities like this. Surely this can't happen in the New World, right? Well, think again. For under Carlos Maria Navarro, a strict ultranationalist, Christian fundamentalist theocracy has been established, coming to power when Spain was utterly ruined due to the civil war. Carlos Arias Navarro's victory can be attributed to the fanaticism of his followers. The fascists, the communists, the democrats, the monarchists all fought bravely in the Spanish Civil War. But the followers of Navarro fought not merely bravely, but fanatically. And that is the difference between victory and defeat. And now the entire Iberia pays the price of it. From Lisbon to Barcelona, from La Coruna to Malanga, there is only one God and there is only one regime. Back in the times of my grandfather, they used to call the Ottoman Empire by name, the sick man of Europe. For people all over the globe wondered, how could a country be called a great power and still be a weak shell? Well, you have the answer in what remains of the Italian Empire. Despite having colonies, despite having all the power that it needs in the Balkans, despite having nuclear weapons, the Italians continue to play second fiddle. Mussolini played second fiddle to Italy, and now the democratized Italian Empire under Amintore Fanfani plays second fiddle not to Germania, but to Tokyo. After a series of international conferences of friendship, the Italian Empire finally did the unthinkable. It joined the Japanese sphere of influence. It joined the Koiken. Now, of course, Italy is not a subject nation of Japan, for Italy has some of its own subjects. In the 1960s, the Italians subjugated Greece and Croatia directly. At the local level, the Croats and Greeks do have some degree of independence, but the Italians did not want to give them complete independence, for they were paranoid of a second uprising, and so on the maps, it is always shown as Italy owning the Balkans. In Romania, King Mihai II's government continues. Nothing has really changed in this land. But in Bulgaria, the Tsar's power has been reduced. The Zveno under Kimon Georgiev has seized all real powers. The Zveno are a bunch of rational fascists. They do not wish to swear allegiance to Germany or Japan or the USA. They have isolated themselves diplomatically. In Serbia, things changed. In the 1960s, there was a three-sided civil war between the communists, the German-funded Nazis, and the monarchists, the Chetniks. The Chetniks won. And later, at its darkest hour, the nation of Serbia, the Kingdom of Serbia, rose up. King Peter II was called back, and Nikola Kalabik's government made the dream of Serbian monarchists come true. Now, they aim in the future to make their other dream come true, the dream of Greater Serbia, but that's in the future. Then we come to the Italian Empire's colony in Libya. Despite being a so-called democracy, the Italians continue to govern Libya as a proper colony. Local Libyans do have some rights since the democratization of Italy, but on the national level, Libyans have no say in how their country is run. But in Ethiopia, the Italians have lost their authority. The other members of the Italian Empire which joined with Japan are Egypt under Anwar Sadat, who is a social nationalist, and Sudan under Ibrahim Aboud, and also Iraq. But before coming to the Arab world, let's take a look at Turkey. The Turks are the clear winners in the Middle East. In the Desert War, the Turks scored a shock victory against the Italians who were already busy subjugating the Balkans. And so Turkey managed to right wrongs and claim northern Syria and parts of Kurdistan that were considered to be an integral part of the Turkish state. These days, Turkey has turned to Islamic conservatism, and the days of Kemal Pasha and his ideology seem to be behind us. In Armenia, there is a very weird little communist statelet under Marius Yuzbashian. But Yerevan's independence is not confirmed, for on its one side is an Islamic Turkey looking to subjugate the communist government, and on its other side is the Nazi Empire, the number one communist haters. In the Middle East, the dream of Arab nationalists have been completely crushed and turned to sand, for none of the Arab nationalist rebellions, which are said to be secretly funded by the Germans, managed to win any civil war. Every single Arab nationalist civil war, insurrection and coup has failed. In Syria, Colonel Adib al-Shishakali's government continues on. In Iraq, the Italians have managed to subjugate the Islamists funded by Japan, the Baathists funded by the Germans, and also the few Democrats. And the Italians have established a neo-colonial state in Iraq led by Vito Micheli. And then we come to the state of Israel. Alas, for the Arabs, the Israelis, after the failure of the Jerusalem Conference, the Jewish Israelis managed to secure total control over all the lands of Palestine. This was a shock to the world. And ever since then, Israel is in a constant state of total war against its own Arab population. And now, the new government of Herut under Menachem Begin has made it even worse, for they are right-wingers. And they shall not rest until Israel has been made for the Jews, Yerushalayim. In Lebanon, however, the one place where Arab nationalist revolutions actually managed to succeed, under Ibrahim Kolayat and his Baathists, the Maronite minority now watches in horror as the Arabs have secured total control over Lebanon. And many Maronites have migrated en masse to Syria and Turkey, and some have started going out to nations like Italy or even the United States of America. In Saudi Arabia, Yemen and Oman, the monarchists have won. In Yemen in particular, the rebellion of the colonels was crushed. In Oman, the Dhofar rebellion under Laila Fakhro's communists was also crushed. In the Arabian Gulf, it is a different story, for here, a prince himself managed to establish a left-wing state, Abdul Rahman al-Bakir. Coming to power, Abdul Rahman al-Bakir actually made life for the people easier. But this had the effect of actually increasing the power of the sheikhs, for now the people had nothing to complain about. In Central Asia and Iran, however, a different kind of force has managed to secure power. Here, nations have turned to Islam as a guiding force for nation building. The first was the Islamic Republic of Kazakhstan under Nikolay Zabelkin. Zabelkin, once a loyal member of the Red Army, found himself in the ruins of Kazakhstan. One day, he stumbled into the house of an imam, and there, under the guidance of the imam, Zabelkin realized that the path of communism that he had been walking his whole life was a sham. Islam was the one and only true faith. And that is how, with his fanaticism, he managed to reunite Kazakhstan. There are some other Islamic states, like the Islamic state of Talas under Turdakun, or the Islamic state of Tajikistan under Maulavi Hindustani, who was originally an Indian. But the largest Islamic state is the most newest one, under Ruhollah Khomeini, the Islamic Republic of Iran. Coming to power in the Iranian civil war, the Islamists managed to defeat the communists, the monarchists, and the democrats, and secure total power, although they could not recover Balochistan. But this is the fate of the Islamic world. Oh yes, I forgot. Afghanistan remains a monarchy under Muhammad Zahir Shah, and a stable one at that. However, surrounded by Islamist forces, Zahir Shah now finds his position to be quite tenuous. Many Islamists have started pouring in from Tajikistan, Turkestan, and Iran, and Zahir Shah fears that an Islamic insurrection in Afghanistan might force him to leave the throne and run away. Meanwhile, in the Turkmen and Uzbek territories, a Japanese-funded rebellion destroyed them, and it has now fractured into various warlords who continuously fight against each other. I know very well that you have been waiting for this moment, for me to talk about Russia, or what remains of it. But what can I say about Russia? For Russia today is not ruled by governments or parties, not even by the military. It is ruled by a bandit, a thug, Mikhail Okhtan. Coming to power as the successor of Lasov in Samara in West Russia, Okhtan and his armies marched triumphantly and established their own state, from border to border. To describe Okhtan's regime as anything more than a bandit would be blasphemy, but let me explain it. Ideologically, Okhtan claims to be a national socialist, but he is not even loyal to this cruel system established by Hitler. He merely uses National Socialism to further his ideological agenda of anti-Semitism and cruelty. Mikhail Oktan's system is simple. There is a hierarchy, a caste system. At the top of the caste system sits Mikhail Oktan himself. Below that sits his loyal dogs of the army of the party. Below that sits corrupt provincial governors or business magnates who have, by the way, been given special economic areas to rule as their own feudal realms. Lower than that sits people who have some kind of knowledge, some kind of expertise, like scientists or army soldiers or other skilled workers, those who serve to feed Oktan's machine. And at the lowest rung sits the people, the commoners, for Oktan doesn't care about them. What Oktan cares about is getting powerful and rich. For the people under him, the various army generals, party officials, business magnates in their special economic zones, they are free to do as they choose in their feudal realms, as long as they feed the men above them, and as long as the men above them feed the one man sitting at the head of Russia, Mikhail Oktan. This is the bandit state that Oktan has established, and the loot of Russia shall continue. With Oktan at its helm, Russia does not really wish to reconquer Moscow. Although Oktan does wish to re-establish his control over Russia, he knows, unlike some other people like Yazov or the communists, Oktan knows that fighting a land war against Germany would be suicidal. Perhaps it could have been done a few years earlier when the Germans lacked powerful world-destroying nuclear weapons. But Oktan is too greedy to risk losing everything or a war for a country he doesn't really love. And so this is how Russia will stay, now and for the next few decades. In the rest of Asia or Eurasia, the Japanese Empire has faced numerous losses. It lost the Philippines to pro-American Democrats. But what a democracy it was! For Carlos Garcia seized power, and he converted the Philippine so-called quote-unquote democracy into an oligarchy, his own feudal system. In an eerie resemblance to Mikhail Oktan's Russia, Carlos P. Garcia has established a realm where corruption is so endemic that nobody really cares anymore. He has also distanced himself from the United States of America and the Organization of Free Nations. The other part of the world that was liberated from the Japanese is Indonesia. And what a mess it is. In the 1960s, Indonesia had a deadly civil war between Sukarno's government funded by the Japanese and Muhammad Hatta's democratic rebellion funded by the OFN. But the war dragged on for so long and claimed the lives of so many people that loyalists of Indonesia couldn't sit back and watch. And so, Suharto on the side of Sukarno and Zulkifli Lubis on the side of Muhammad Hatta couped their respective overlords and established a peace accord. Today, the both men, Suharto and Lubis, rule together. And so that is their regime, a statocratic military regime loyal to the OFN, but only to a degree. Meanwhile, the Prim Military Council continues to be an independent statelet, ruling from its base in Pekanbaru. In China, however, a different path to liberty has been taken. For Gao Zongwu's ideology, loyal to Sun Yat-sen and the old KMT, remains firm. But Zongwu knows that fighting a costly liberation war against Japan will lead to nothing but the ruin of China, and hence he has taken the path of subseverance. For he knows that under the Japanese umbrella, China can still prosper. Zongwu's policies have benefited China a lot. However, loyalists of Chinese independence claim that he is nothing but a traitor who must be removed as fast as possible. The rest of China is divided into local governments and pro-Japanese military installations, except for Manchuria. After the death of Aisin Gyoro Puyi, Gu Zhicheng and his Somucho reform bureaucrats seized power. The bureaucrats are Japanophiles, but they also oppose the IJA and the people who want to liberate Manchuria from Japanese rule. The bureaucrats have turned Manchuria into a perfect colony of Japan, neither too liberal nor too democratic, and neither too cruel lest they risk a rebellion. In the state of Guangdong, the state of bright lights, huge corporations, endless factories spewing out black smoke, and colonial oppression sits Matsushita Masaharu. Masaharu is a very Japanocentric man. Among all the leaders of the various corporations, the head of Panasonic, Matsushita Masaharu, is extremely indifferent to the fate of all the Zuchin and Chinese people living in Guangdong. Masaharu, however, is also a very efficient man at bureaucracy and diplomacy. So he isn't extremely cruel. He has managed to balance the needs and wants of the Zuchin and the Chinese and also his overlords in Japan. And he has made Guangdong a stable colonial statelet of the Japanese corporations. In India, the Congress has lost power. After decades of Congress one-party rule and locked down Nehruvian Byzantine economic practices, the people have turned to a new ideology, the ideology of Hindutva, a land for Hindus, under Atal Bihari Vajpayee of the Bharatiya Janasangh. Vajpayee's election victory is a shock to Japan and the OFN, for he is a Hindu nationalist. This has widened the gap between New Delhi and Calcutta, where Bose's ideology of personalist secular nationalism runs in direct contrast to Vajpayee's Hindutva. But Bose is aging, and nobody knows what the future might hold for the Azad Hind government and its Bhutanese puppet state. In Ceylon, we see a conservative government of Dudley Senayanke. In Burma, Aung San's social nationalists. Laos and Vietnam are also military juntas and despotic statelets, while in Kampuchea, King Norodom Sihanouk continues to rule as a quasi-absolute monarch. In Thailand, Chun Havan rules. He is the perfect successor of Paleg, and he continues the functions of the Paleg dictatorships. In the Federation of Malaya, however, a revolutionary front government has been established by Ahmed Boistaman. Only the future will tell how revolutionary his government will be. And in Australia, liberalism is the word to go. In New Zealand, however, the people have turned to conservatism. Hawaii continues to be under the Japanese Empire. And then we come to Canada. Canada is a state that lives in a second type of paranoia from Europe. While Europe fears Nazi oppression, the Canadians fear that their independence be compromised due to the American ideals. John Deave Baker's stories have recently been elected on the basis of separating Canada from the goals and aspirations of the Americans and establishing a peace between Quebecois nationalists and the rest of America. In economic terms, he is a prairie populist, a conservative, who will neither liberalize the economy too much, and of course, he dislikes socialists. In Mexico, Carlos Alberto Madrazo has become president. After years of PRI rule, the PRI has finally turned to reformism. But this has come about at the cost of strengthening the PRI further. Many people compare Carlos Alberto Madrazo to Lázaro Cárdenas, and the rest of Central America and the Caribbean remains a dense network of varying ideology, from conservatism, liberalism, to left-wing populism, social democracy, and also Fidel Castro's own unique ideology of institutional despotism. Castro now believes in Robespierre. Now we turn to the island which was once the center of the French Empire's sugar. In the Dominican Republic, the son of Rafael Trujillo has turned out to be even more cruel than his father. Ramfis Trujillo has established a fascist state in the Dominican Republic. He has also defeated the Haitians in the war, and Haiti has been now reduced to a rump state, and a socialist revolution has occurred. But Trujillo is not alone, for there is another black spot on the American continent, Colombia. This is the one part of the New World where the Nazis have won. Heh, who am I kidding? Of course it is not. There is the Dominican Republic, there is New Granada, but there is other. But before that, let's discuss Colombia, or New Granada. The state of New Granada came to being after Il Duce Gilberto Alzate Avendano seized power. Avendano died shortly after seizing power, and his successor Leon Maria Lozano placed Luis Mariano Ospina Perez as his puppet president. Real power is held by Leon Maria Lozano. The regime is what can be described as a brutal Christian Catholic theocracy, which is very similar to a certain nation in Spain. And of course, the regime has increased its relations with the new Spanish government. The regime of Colombia has instituted brutal laws like the crushing of communists and also establishing reactionary policies like the death penalty for homosexuals and mass jailing of those who read porn. In Venezuela, on the other hand, a progressive government has been established under Romulo Betancourt and his Betancourt Doctrine. In Guyana, the Americans forcibly removed Forbes Burnham and placed Peter de Aguirre on the throne of Guyana. Guyana is now a pro-American liberal conservative democracy. In Ecuador, Manuel Agustin Aguirre established a Guevarist dictatorship. For Che Guevara's inspiration has spread to Ecuador, and a massive guerrilla movement managed to succeed and enter the gates of the presidential palace at Quito. Large-scale land reform and other socialist policies have been undertaken in Ecuador, which is now firmly under the ideology of revolutionary socialism. In Peru and in Bolivia and in Chile, military juntas or conservative democracies continue. In Uruguay, we have a liberal democracy. But then there are some other factors at play. In Paraguay, Rafael Franco's left-wing corporatists, the Fabreristas, have seized power. They have instituted a system which is neither socialism, neither democracy, but left-wing nationalism. But anything is better than what was before it, the brutal pro-German dictatorship. And then we come to Argentina, the most weird South American regime of Isabel Martínez de Perón, the second wife of Juan Perón, who came to power after his death. To say that Isabel Perón is not fit to rule a country is an understatement. Her education, her basic primary education is doubtful. Her IQ, they say, is very low. But even worse, she has various fascist and German sympathies. And along with her Minister of Welfare, Lopez Rega, she is an esoteric occultist. For the two are dabbling into the occult and want to bring back the soul of Juan Perón's first wife, Evita Perón, and inject it into Isabel. And they believe that these occultist practices will increase their powers over Argentina. But Argentina is not in the German sphere of influence. One might ask, why does the USA tolerate Argentina like this? The answer is one: communism. For the US-sponsored Operation Condor is going on in full swing in Argentina, although many deny it in both Washington and Buenos Aires. Communists and people opposed to Isabel Perón's regime are being crushed en masse. And that is the state of South and the rest of Latin America. Now we come to Africa. The Kingdom of Morocco continues to be an absolutist monarchy, and during the Spanish Civil War, Morocco seized all the lands that it had claimed in Africa. In Algeria, a Pied Noir dictatorship has been established under Jean-Claude Perez. Air and Kanem continue to be some sort of nationalist or monarchy dictatorships, while in Ethiopia the Italians have lost all power. In Somalia, a very surprising democracy has been established, although God knows how long the democracy shall really continue. But for now, Abdullahi Isa Mahmoud has established a sort of Islamic democracy. In Africa, there is a new kind of revolutionary fervor, the Pan-African Liberation Front, a bunch of African socialists. Socialism, these African socialists claim, is not really fit for the African land. For how can Africa be atheist when its culture and traditions and religions are so intertwined together with its society? They argued. And that is how the Pan-African Liberation Front, headed by stalwarts such as Kwame Nkrumah and Félix Roland Moumi, managed to defeat the Free French and establish Pan-African dictatorships in most of West and even parts of Central Africa. By no means, however, are these people really Democrats or even socialists. Kwame Nkrumah's government in particular can be described as an extremely corrupt oligarchy with a red color of paint applied to it. Nevertheless, it is generally agreed upon in OFN circles that Kwame Nkrumah's government is better than colonialism. At the same time, the OFN also supports the Free French state, who have now been confined to a little island, the Port-aux-Francaise. Here rots the soul of Free France. This is the result of what happened to the French army in World War II. Here is where the destiny of Free France has ended, this small little frigid island close to Antarctica. This is the death of the old France. But while France has died, there has been dawn in a new place, in Africa. After the destruction of the German Reichskommissariat and the victory of the OFN-sponsored South African government, the OFN slowly democratized and handed over power to locals. By no means did the OFN ensure, though, that there were democratic governments put in place, as is evident from Jonas Savimbi and Eduardo Mondlane's dictatorships, the former being right-wing and the latter being left-wing. But there are some genuine democracies, like Zambia, where Simon Kapewe is a pro-US national liberal, or the Congo, where Christian conservatism is the norm of the day, or the East African Federation. But there are some very disturbing warlords, like the state of Uganda, where Idi Amin, the cannibal warlord, has established an absolutist dictatorship, or the B African Republic, where David Dacko has established an authoritarian democracy, or the Republic of Orungu, where Leon Emba has established a system of oligarchy which can be described as right-wing Kwame Nkrumah. And so this is the fate of the world. The so-called Kalter Krieg has been won quite efficiently by the Americans. The Nazi Empire in Europe is now threatened by the OFN, as Britain and France are on the side of America. In Africa, the Nazis have completely lost their colonial empire, and the Japanese have faced defeats and losses in the Philippines and Indonesia. But this doesn't mean that a fourth world doesn't exist. A fourth world. A fourth world of despots like Carlos Arias Navarro, Mikhail Ochtan, or Luis Mariano Espina Perez. For these people are the most dangerous new threats, and I predict that in the coming few years they shall be as dangerous to the cause of liberty as the Nazi Empire or the Dai Nippon Teikoku. Alas, may my grandpa rest in peace.